Hey there. Tonight's story is not about the Catherine they teach in history class. It's about the version they tried to bury. The one who moved through the palace halls not as an empress, but as a woman. Someone sharp. Someone tired. Someone real. You'll sit with her tonight. Listen to what the paintings never captured. But before we begin dim, the lights breathe slow and deep. And if you enjoy these midnight journeys through time, take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment with where you re-listening from. I always love knowing where this little time machine takes us. Now lean back, sink into the stillness, and let the night unfold. Tonight's journey takes you to a palace wrapped in candlelight and silence where history, sharpest mind, waits not on a throne, but in the quiet. You were not invited by a name. No title. Just a note slipped under your door. It said, "Come dressed in silence," and you did. You step into the snow outside the winter palace, under a sky that doesn't blink. The river lies frozen beside you, the city asleep behind you, and yet the windows ahead burn like they've been waiting. A servant meets you at the gate. He does not ask your name. He does not speak. He simply bows and begins walking, and you follow because tonight is not about questions. It's about the story waiting inside. The corridors are tall and soundless. The walls gleam gold in the flickering torchlight. You pass through rooms painted in dust and whispers. A gallery where statues line up like frozen arguments. A ballroom that smells faintly of lavender and wax. You do not stop. The servant leads you deeper and deeper until the air feels like something new, heavy, expectant. He stops before a tall white door with no handle. He knocks once. Then, he's gone. You're alone, but you're not. The door opens by itself. She's inside. Catherine. Not the Empress in portraits. Not the conqueror of lands. Just her. Standing by the fire, her back to you, one hand wrapped around a cup, the other resting on the arm of the chair beside her. She does not turn. Not yet. The silence stretches. Not uncomfortable, just deliberate. Then she speaks, and the voice is lower than you imagined. Clear, precise, not cold. Close the door, she says. You do. The sound of it clicking shut feels like falling into water. You're in now. Truly in. She turns finally and looks at you, and for a second you forget who she is supposed to be. She is not draped in power. Not wrapped in diamonds. She wears something simple. Dark. Fitted. Her hair is undone. Her eyes are not searching. They are choosing. Tell me something true, she says. Anything. Just make it yours. You hesitate. Not because you don't have something to say, but because no one has asked you for truth in a long time. Not like this. So you speak. You tell her about the note. About the way the snow sounded beneath your boots. About a dream you once had of walking through the Hermitage at night alone and awake. She listens. Not like royalty. Like someone who is used to words being offered like currency, and now finally hears something not for sale. She nods once. Good, she says. Now we can begin. She sits and gestures toward the chair across from her. The fire between you throws up soft gold light that clings to the edges of her face. You sit. She does not introduce herself. She doesn't have to. You both know who she is. But more importantly, you're starting to understand who she is not. She begins to speak slowly and with a kind of precision that feels almost surgical. This is not a confession. It's not even a memory. It's a dissection. She starts with a name. Not her own. A man's. A boy, really. Someone who courted her when she was just a girl with a different name and a different future. She speaks of him not with longing, but with a sort of intellectual tenderness. The kind you give to an old book you read once and never forgot. He was the first to lie to her. Not cruelly. Not even knowingly. He simply promised something he could never give. Freedom. She tells you the first time she realized she was being watched. Not as a person, but as a symbol. A future wife. A vessel. She speaks about the day she arrived in Russia, and the clothes they made her wear, and the name they told her to answer to, and the language she had to swallow whole just to survive. You realize she's not recounting these things for drama. She is stating facts, cleanly, like a surgeon. Or a queen. She takes a sip from her cup. You notice her hands are steady, always steady. The cup clinks softly against the saucer, and the sound is the loudest thing in the room. She talks about the early days, the whispers, the women who smiled too much, the men who smiled too little, the court that waited for her to fall so they could pretend they were surprised. She speaks of her husband, but not with bitterness. That would be too small. Instead, she talks of him like a puzzle missing half its pieces. She does not blame him. She does not spare him. She simply places him in the story where he belongs. A weight, a wall, a lesson. Then she leans forward slightly, and the light catches her cheekbone just enough to show the edge beneath the softness. I didn't plan to rule, she says. I planned to survive. But the two became the same. You sit in silence, not frozen, not unsure, just present, fully, as if the air in this room has learned to breathe only when you do. She notices, and her mouth twitches. Not quite a smile, but close. She shifts in her chair, pulls one foot up beneath her, and tells you that she never once wept in public. Not once. Not even at funerals. Not even when they betrayed her. Because if they ever saw her break, they would rewrite the story to make it look like she was never whole. You think of the portraits, the statues, the cold marble versions of her that stand in galleries, and you realize those are not her legacy. This fire, this story, this truth unpainted. She stands now and walks to the window. The snow outside is falling heavier. The city beyond it is dark and waiting. She places a hand on the glass, and her breath clouds the pain. She watches it fade, like it always does. Then she says something that makes you sit straighter. I know what they'll say about me when I'm gone. I've already heard it. In the eyes of every man who thought his version of me was more important than mine. You want to say something, but you don't. Not yet, because she's not done. Not even close. She moved from the window slowly, but with purpose, like the moment itself is something she is shaping, not walking through. She returns to her seat but does not sit. Instead, she circles the fire, and for the first time you notice the small details she keeps hidden from paintings. A faint line at her brow, not from age, but from calculation. A shadow in her posture, not from weakness, but from weight. You are not in the presence of power. You are in the presence of a woman who has bent power to her will. She tells you about the letters, not the ones they framed or translated or quoted. The others. The ones written in code in margins on scraps of paper that burn before morning. She says the truth lives in what they never found. She tells you how she learned to listen in 3 languages at once. How silence can be the loudest signal. How a well-timed glance in court could rewrite alliances. She smiles at your expression. Do not look so surprised, she says. Men have always ruled loudly. We had to rule quietly. The fire crackles, and she finally sits again, and this time you feel the shift. The atmosphere around you settles deeper. She's about to show you something real. She pulls a velvet pouch from beneath the table and sets it before you. Inside is a coin. Dull, worn, unremarkable. She tells you it was her father's. He carried it until the day he died. Not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him that luck is a language only the desperate learn to speak fluently. She carries it now for a different reason. It reminds her not of luck, but of lineage. That before the titles and palaces and revolutions, she was someone's daughter. And in being so, she became someone who could never again be seen as only herself. You turn the coin in your fingers. It's heavy in a way most objects are not. Weighted not with gold, but with meaning. She talks about her son now. Carefully. Slowly. She chooses her words like she's folding paper. She does not say he betrayed her. She says he believed the stories others told more than the ones she lived. She does not call him ungrateful. She calls him young. There is no anger in her voice, only fatigue. Not from him, from the world that told him how to see her before he had a chance to look for himself. She watches you now more closely, as if measuring your silence. She asks if you've ever lost something that was never really yours. And before you can answer, she adds, or someone. The room tilts, not physically, but emotionally. You understand. This is not just a story. It is a reckoning. And you are not just a listener. You are a mirror, a witness. A kind of absolution she will never ask for out loud. The candles are burning lower. The light is softer now, less gold, more amber. Her voice lowers with it. She begins to tell you about the night she knew she would take the throne. Not the ceremony, not the proclamation. The moment before. The space where possibility lives. She says it was not grand, not cinematic. It was quiet. Still, she stood in front of a mirror and asked herself if she could love a version of herself that no one else would ever know. And when she answered yes, she stepped into power not as a mask, but as a mantle. You ask if she ever doubted it. And she laughs. Not bitterly, but brightly. Of course, she says. Every time I won. Every time they knelt. Every time they whispered. I wondered if it was me they saw, or the version they built to survive me. The laugh fades, but not completely. She's still amused. Still present. Still here. She tells you that every man she ever loved tried to make her softer, gentler, easier, and every one of them claimed it was for her sake. None of them understood that what they called softness she had carved out of herself a long time ago to stay alive. And she never put it back. She doesn't cry. She doesn't break. But she shifts slightly, and for a moment you see it. Not weakness. Not sadness. The weight of being known only in fragments. And the ache of knowing none of those fragments were ever really hers. She walks to a cabinet and opens it. Inside are books. Old. Unlabeled. She pulls one out and flips it open to a marked page. She reads aloud. Something about stars and soil and how power rooted in fear will never bear fruit. Then she closes it and looks at you. That was written by a farmer's daughter. Not a scholar. Not a noble. Just someone who knew what power looked like without castles. You realize what she's doing. She is not recounting history. She is reclaiming it. Not for the world, for herself. And by sharing it with you, she is offering something more intimate than any royal decree. She is offering context. And in doing so, she is asking you not just to hear her story, but to carry it. To preserve the version they never wrote down. The snow outside has stopped. The world is still again. She sits beside you now, closer than before. Not imposing, not regal. Just a woman beside a fire sharing something she cannot give to anyone else. She tells you one more thing before the room falls silent again. There was a garden, she says, just beyond the palace walls. No statues, no guards, just flowers. She went there alone, in secret. It was the only place she ever let herself forget who she was supposed to be. She buried letters there, names, fears, hopes. None of them survive now, but she does. And in some way, that is the greatest rebellion of all. You do not speak. You do not need to. She nods once. The moment is complete, not ended, just complete. You wake to silence, not the kind that comes from absence, but the kind that feels intentional, the kind that's watching you. The fire has burned down to a gentle glow, casting soft amber across the room. You're still in the chair. She's still beside you, but now her posture is different. Not guarded, not formal, like she's peeled something off. Not clothing, expectation. She looks over and asks if you've ever kept a secret so long it stopped feeling like hiding. You don't answer right away. She nods like she didn't expect you to. She tells you that in her world, Truth isn't something you speak. It's something you protect. You protect it by cloaking it in lies that are just convincing enough to make people stop asking questions. It becomes second nature. A dance, a shadow language. And eventually, you forget which parts were ever real. She walks to a tall mirror in the corner of the room. One that looks like it belonged to another century entirely. She touches the edge of the glass, like it might ripple beneath her fingers. She tells you that this mirror is the only one in the palace that has never been moved. That for decades, it's reflected queens and thieves and lovers and liars. It knows more history than the people writing it down. She stands in front of it, still watching herself. Then she glances at you through the reflection and says quietly, "I used to practice what I'd say if I ever got the chance to be honest. I'd rehearse it like a speech. Eyes on the mirror. Hands steady. Back straight. But when the moment came, I always blinked. Always smiled instead. It was safer that way. You can tell she's not really talking about mirrors. She's talking about masks. The ones we learn to wear so well we forget we put them on. You think of the portraits again. All those paintings trying to pin her down with angles and color and light. None of them caught this. This flicker of truth, burning low but steady. She sits again and tells you about a man she once trusted. Not a lover, not a courtier, a guard. Someone quiet, efficient, invisible in the way only servants can be. He saved her life once, not by drawing a sword, but by intercepting a whisper. He never told her what it said, only that it was meant to unmake her. She never asked, because she knew. She knew exactly what her enemies would have said, and still, it was enough. That unspoken loyalty. That moment where someone chose to shield her without being asked. She looks at you then, and for a heartbeat, it feels like she's asking if you would have done the same. If you'd have stood still beside her while the world circled like a hawk overhead. But she doesn't say it aloud. She just lifts the corner of her mouth in something between amusement and memory. The wind outside has picked up again. You can hear it whistling against the window panes. But in here, the air is thick. Not with heat, with history. She begins to tell you about the first time she realized her story was no longer hers. When poets started using her name in metaphors. When pamphlets painted her as goddess and demon in the same breath. When people started arguing about her legacy while she was still alive to hear it. She says it wasn't rage that hit her. It was disbelief. As if she were watching her own life turned into a stage play. Actors in powdered wigs mouthing lines she never spoke. And the audience? Applauding things she never did. She pours another drink but doesn't offer you one. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. This drink isn't for sharing. It's for remembering. She tells you about a dress. Not one from a portrait. Not one embroidered with gems or silks. A simple one. Pale blue. Worn only once on a summer evening no one else remembers. She wore it barefoot in the palace garden after a storm, walking among the damp grass and broken branches. For a few minutes she forgot she was Catherine the Great. She was just a woman with wet feet and the scent of lilacs in her nose. She has never worn it since. Not because it tore. Because that moment was perfect, and nothing perfect should be repeated. She turns to you and asks if you understand. And you do. You really do. She tells you one more thing before the silence returns. I never hated the crown, she says. I hated what it asked me to give up. And what it convinced others they could take without asking. She doesn't wait for your reply. She just lets the words sit there, like coins on a table, waiting to be counted or forgotten. You lean back, and the room exhales with you. She reaches for a small wooden box tucked beneath the table. It's unadorned, except for a brass hinge worn smooth by time. She opens it slowly, revealing a handful of objects that don't seem to belong to a palace. A ribbon, faded at the edges. A page torn from a book, its corner singed. A chess piece, chipped at the base. She lifts each one with care, letting her fingers linger just a moment longer than needed. She tells you these are not relics. They are reminders of who she was before people decided she belonged to history. She tells you about the ribbon first. It was from the hair of her childhood friend, a girl who taught her how to sneak bread from the kitchen without getting caught, who showed her how to climb trees without tearing silk, who whispered stories in the dark when homesickness made her cry. The girl disappeared one day without warning. Rumors said plague. Others whispered treason. Catherine never found out. But she kept the ribbon because it was the last thing in her life that came without consequence. The burnt page belonged to a book she was never meant to read. Philosophy. Forbidden in the early years. She read it anyway, by candlelight, under blankets, heart pounding at every creak of the hallway. It was the first time she read words that told her power wasn't inherited. It was claimed. It was earned. That night, she decided she would not just be a figurehead. She would become a force. The chess piece was from a set her tutor used to teach her strategy. But this piece, the Black Queen, she kept for another reason. On the day she surpassed her teacher, he laughed and said she'd become too clever for her own good. She took the piece and carried it with her from then on, not as a trophy, but as a warning. Cleverness is rarely forgiven when it belongs to a woman. She places the items back in the box, one by one, then closes the lid gently, sealing the memories inside. You can feel the weight of it all, not just the box. The life it represents, the version of her no court ever bowed to, no painter ever captured. She shifts again, this time rising slowly and walking toward a set of curtains you hadn't noticed before. She draws them back, revealing a narrow hallway lined with windows that overlook the frozen garden below. She beckons you to follow. The corridor is quiet. Your steps echo faintly against stone. She points to the garden below and tells you this was where she made her hardest decisions. Not in chambers or councils, but here, walking slowly in circles, tracing paths through the snow, letting her thoughts harden like the ice beneath her feet. She says people believe power makes you invincible, but it doesn't. It just makes your bruises harder to see. You don't get fewer wounds. You just learn how to bleed without showing it. You stop at the last window. The light outside is dimming now, dusk bleeding into night. She rests her hand against the cold glass. The snow is falling again, softly, steadily, like the sky is breathing out something it's been holding all day. She turns to you, and without pretense, without mask, she says, I never wanted to be remembered the way they did. I wanted to be understood. But you can't demand that. You can only hope someone stumbles close enough to see past the myth, and then she smiles. Not like a queen, not like a ruler. Like a woman who has let you in too far to pretend otherwise. She leads you back to the room. The fire is nearly out. The walls are darker now, not from shadow, but from time. She sits once more and says, Would you like to see something no one else has? Before you can answer, she stands again and disappears into the adjoining room. When she returns, she carries a single envelope, unsealed, unlabeled. She places it in your hand. Inside is a letter, her handwriting. Not flowing, not decorative. Sharp, efficient. Each word deliberate. It's a letter she wrote to herself, decades ago, on the night she first realized her name would outlive her. You read it, silently. She watches you the entire time. It speaks of fear, of desire, of the crushing weight of legacy, of the desperate hope that someone, someday, will tell the truth of her without turning it into a weapon or a spectacle. You finish reading and look up. She says nothing. She doesn't have to. The room says it for her. The candlelight, the soft creak of the chair, the silence that asks you to remember this, not as history, but as confession. You fold the letter and hand it back. She doesn't take it. Keep it, she says, not because I need you to believe me, but because I need someone to remember that I tried. You nod, and for a moment you see her as she sees herself. Not as Catherine the Great, but as the girl with the ribbon, the reader with the forbidden book, the woman with the Black Queen in her pocket. The candle burns lower, its flame stretching, shivering slightly as if it too is exhausted by everything unsaid. She leans forward now, her hands folded, her shoulders looser than before. Something in her has changed, or maybe something in you has. It's hard to tell where the shift began. She says nothing for a long while, just sits in the quiet, the kind of quiet that people only share when there's nothing left to prove. You're not sure how much time has passed. The world beyond these walls feels dreamlike now, distant and irrelevant. Snow could be piling halfway up the palace gates, and it wouldn't touch this moment. She finally speaks again, her voice quieter, not tired, resigned, like someone who has been carrying stories too long and has only just begun to set them down. She tells you about love, not in the way poets write it or courtiers whisper it, in the way it haunts. She tells you about a man she loved who never loved her back, not cruelly, not dismissively, just honestly. He admired her, feared her perhaps, but did not love her. She learned to live with that, to stop trying to turn admiration into affection, to stop trying to earn what should have been given freely. Her voice doesn't break when she says it. That's how you know it still hurts. She moves to the window again and watches the snow falling in sheets. You can't see the garden anymore, just white, endless white. She says it reminds her of the blank pages in her journal. So many entries she meant to write. So many nights she intended to tell the truth and ended up drafting laws instead. She tells you she used to write little notes and hide them inside hollow books, as if she could bury pieces of herself in the palace, and one day someone might unearth her soul like a secret map. She smiles, but it doesn't reach her eyes. You ask her what happened to the notes. She shrugs. Lost, maybe, burned. Maybe someone is using them to line drawers in a room she hasn't visited in 20 years. Either way, she says, they're no longer mine. Nothing here really is. Not the dresses, not the paintings, not even the words in the speeches they attribute to me. You step closer, not to comfort her but to listen more fully. She notices, and she nods slightly, like she approves of the way you don't try to fill the silence with softness. She says, that's the thing about queens. People assume we are what they made us. Symbols, statues. But even statues crack if you look long enough. You're doing that now, looking, not at the crown or the legend, but at the lines beneath. She tells you of a night she snuck out of the palace in a borrowed cloak, alone, no guards, no destination, just a need to disappear for a while, to walk like a stranger among her own people. She bought bread with coins she wasn't supposed to carry, fed a stray dog her supper, laughed with a child who asked if she was a witch. When she returned, no one had noticed she was gone. That was the moment, she says, when I understood how much of me had already been erased, even while I was still breathing. The wind howls suddenly, and she flinches, not in fear, in memory. You can see it on her face, some moment rushing back like a storm. She tells you about a night when revolution nearly reached her gates, when she stood in this very room and wondered if she would die in her sleep, not because she was weak, but because the story needed an ending and death makes for a better one than truth. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote a letter to her enemies. She never sent it, but the letter still exists somewhere. She turns to you again. Do you want to see it? She asks. And for the first time, there's a glint in her eyes. Not defiance, not mischief, something stranger. Trust. You nod. She disappears once more and returns with a folded parchment, edges brittle, sealed with wax that has faded to a dull rose. She breaks it open, no ceremony, no hesitation. She lets you read it aloud. It's not an apology. It's not a plea. It's a reckoning. She lays out her sins like cards on a table, not to be forgiven, just to be known. She names the people she betrayed, the laws she bent, the rooms she entered that cost her friends. And at the end, one line. I do not ask you to spare me. I only ask that if you write me down, you write me whole." When you look up, her eyes are closed, not asleep, just still, as if she's letting you carry the weight of her words for a moment so she can finally rest. She breathes in slowly, as if every inhale pulls her further away from the masks, the portraits, the pages etched by someone else's ink. You wonder how long she's been holding her breath, not just tonight, for years, for decades, perhaps since the moment someone first called her great. She opens her eyes again and meets your gaze with something ancient in them. Not old, timeless, the kind of stare that sees through generations. She asks if you've ever tried to unlearn something history taught you, not a fact, a feeling, a name, a myth. She tells you she once believed that power came from being worshipped, but the older she got, the more she understood. Real power is in being remembered truthfully by someone who saw you without the crown. She pauses, looks at the candle again. The wick is low. The wax has puddled unevenly. She leans over and snuffs it out with 2 fingers. No flinch, just darkness. Now the room is lit only by moonlight, a cold pale silver that cuts through the gaps in the curtains like slivers of memory. She lights another candle with care, setting it down on the table between you. One flame, small, but enough. She says, "This is all I ever wanted. Not a throne, not a statue, just a moment where I'm seen without translation." She tells you of her childhood, not the parts in history books, but the quiet humiliations, the letters from home that arrived already opened. The shoes that didn't fit, but she wore anyway because someone said they looked royal. The laughter that got quieter each year until it became a smile that knew when to retreat. You realize that the woman before you is not mourning the past. She's mourning the person she never got to be. She gets up once more and walks to a corner cabinet you hadn't noticed. Inside are shelves lined with locked journals, dozens of them, each marked only with a number, not a name. She opens one, selects a journal near the center, and places it in your hands. You flip it open and find it filled with notes in 2 different handwritings, hers and someone else. A friend? A lover? She doesn't say, but the entries are written like a conversation carried across seasons. Some pages are smudged, others torn. One even has a dried leaf pressed between the ink, a remnant of some shared autumn long forgotten. She lets you read without watching, gives you the space to feel instead of perform. The words are mundane: weather, illness, banquets, but there's a tenderness in the rhythm, an intimacy in the ordinary, the kind of closeness that doesn't need to announce itself. You realize that these pages are more honest than any memoir written in her name. When you hand the journal back, she tucks it into the shelf like it was never gone. She tells you that these are her real legacy. Not laws or monuments, these scribbled thoughts, hidden truths, pieces of a woman they never truly met. You ask if anyone else has ever seen them. She shakes her head. Only you. There's a pause. And then she asks you something simple. Do you believe me? You don't answer, not because you don't, but because you know belief isn't what she's asking for. She wants to know if she's real to you now, not the statue, not the sovereign, just the woman in this room. You nod, and for the first time all night, she smiles like she means it. You both sit again, the silence between you not heavy now, but full, like a pause in music, like breath before a kiss. The snow outside has stopped. The moonlight has softened. The room feels less like a palace and more like a memory you've stepped into, unsure of how long you'll be allowed to stay. She reaches into her sleeve and pulls out a ring. Simple, iron, not royal, not ceremonial. She sets it on the table between you and says, "I wore this before I wore gold, before anyone expected me to change the world. It doesn't fit anymore, but I keep it because it reminds me that there was once a girl who thought she'd be forgotten. And maybe now she won't be." You sit with her a little longer, knowing that the candle will burn out soon, knowing that this room will return to stillness, but you will not forget it, and neither will she. Not tonight. You wake before dawn, not from a sound, not from movement, from a feeling, the kind that hums beneath the skin, like something is shifting, something important. The room is still wrapped in shadows, but they're softer now, not hiding anything, just resting. You see her seated again by the window, same place, same posture, as if she's been there all night watching the snow fade into mist, watching the world return without fanfare. Her back is to you, but there's no tension in her shoulders, no sharpness in the curve of her neck. She is quiet, not out of silence, but out of peace. You rise slowly, not to disturb, just to join. She doesn't turn, but she speaks. I was afraid once that I'd only be remembered for the parts of me they could use. Her voice is low, not tired, but reverent, like every word is being chosen for the last time. She tells you that history is not a mirror, it's a spotlight. It decides who gets to be visible and who gets left in the shadows, and for all the titles they gave her for all the portraits, she was always just trying to be known beyond the frame. She turns to face you now. Her eyes are not watery or red, just bright, awake in the way only the very honest become after a long night. She says, I was not always kind. I was not always right, but I was always trying, and that should count for something. You sit across from her again, same seats, same low flame, but everything feels different. You've crossed a threshold, one not marked by hours, but by truth. She says she once believed that power was about control, and then she discovered it was about surrender, about letting people see the mess, the mistakes, the whole of a person, not just the polished parts. She leans forward, now elbows on knees, and tells you that there were nights she didn't know if she would wake up with her title or her life. That every decision felt like gambling with someone else's fate, that being strong wasn't. About never breaking. It was about learning how to rebuild without anyone noticing. She confesses that the hardest part of ruling wasn't the war or the politics. It was pretending that her loneliness was a strength, that sleeping alone made her unbreakable, that being feared made her whole. She says, I was surrounded by people every day, but I only ever felt seen when no one was looking. You don't interrupt. You don't console, you simply hold the space, and in doing so you give her something rare. Not pity, not awe, just presence. And she notices you can see it in the way her hand shifts closer to yours on the table. Not to touch, just to be near. She rises and walks slowly toward the fireplace. The ashes have cooled, but she kneels anyway and traces a finger through them. She says this was where she first burned a speech she couldn't bring herself to deliver. One that asked her to lie, to pretend she supported something she couldn't bear. She tells you she watched the flames and wondered what else could disappear so easily. A name, a legacy, a self. She stands again, dusts her hands on her robe, and says, you know, the most dangerous thing about being powerful is that people stop telling you the truth. They give you what they think you want, and eventually, you forget what it felt like to be spoken to honestly. Then she looks at you, really looks, and says, but not tonight. She pours 2 small glasses of something clear and sharp from a decanter that looks older than memory. She hands one to you, her fingers brushing yours briefly. You down. To ask what it is, she doesn't offer the name. You both sip. It burns like honesty, clean, necessary. She says this was her father's drink. She hated the taste when she was young. But later, when things became harder to swallow than alcohol, it became a reminder that some things must sting to be real. You both stand by the window now. The light outside is pale and rising, a kind of blue that only exists in early morning, a color that never lasts. She says it always made her feel like time was pausing, just for her, that maybe if she stood still enough, it would hold its breath and let her be a person instead of a myth. She tells you she used to dream of running, not away, just elsewhere, to a place where she could speak without being decoded, where she could laugh without someone wondering if it meant policy, where she could wear linen instead of silk, and no one would ask what it symbolized. She looks at you again, long, quiet. She says, Do you think they'd still follow me if they saw me like this? You know the answer, but you also know that isn't really the question. She sits again, this time curling her legs beneath her, like a girl pretending to be small. She pulls a box from beneath the low table, opens it. Inside are trinkets, broken pendants, bits of ribbon, dried flowers, a cracked monocle. She lifts them one by one, explaining each with the kind of tenderness that can't be faked. This was a gift from someone who left without saying goodbye. This was a ribbon from a dress I never wore again. This flower was stolen from a bouquet meant for someone else. She places them down carefully, not like relics, like memories. You realize you're watching someone dismantle a version of themselves they no longer need. Not destroy, just release. She says that once, someone told her she'd be remembered as a great ruler, and that terrified her. Because greatness, in their eyes, meant distance, perfection, unreachability. But what she wanted was to be remembered as human, flawed, glorious, messy, real. You sit beside her again. No words now, just the weight of understanding between you. She leans her head against your shoulder, not to rest, to share. Her breath is steady, her pulse a quiet rhythm against your arm. She says, this is the part they'll never write down, and maybe that's okay. Outside, the snow has melted into frost. The light grows stronger, not harsh but golden, a new day. One that will come with duties and letters and expectations, but not yet. She says, if I never see you again, promise me one thing that you'll tell someone. Not about this night, not about the stories, about the feeling, the silence that wasn't empty, the words that didn't need to prove anything, the way it felt to be seen without needing to shine. You promise, without speaking, because she already knows. The candle gutters once, then steadies. She says, good, then I am not afraid. You wake to the soft shuffle of paper. The light outside has shifted again, warmer now, like late morning or maybe early afternoon. You don't know how long you've slept, only that the world is quieter than before. She's seated at the far end of the room, floor-length robe wrapped loosely around her, the sunlight catching in her hair as she scribbles something onto thick parchment. Her posture is relaxed, but there's intent behind every line of ink. You move slowly, not to startle her, but she glances up before you speak. A small smile, tired but real, crosses her lips. You made it through the night, she says, as if that alone is worth acknowledging. She gestures for you to come closer, and you do, sitting across from her again, like no time has passed. Her hand hovers over the page. It's a letter, she explains, but not one that will ever be sent. Just words that needed to live somewhere outside her head. She doesn't ask you to read it, and you don't reach for it. Some things aren't meant to be shared, only witnessed. She sets the pen down, the motion fluid and final. Then she leans back and exhales. It was always the mornings that felt the hardest, she says. Not because of what had to be done, but because of what had to be hidden. You ask her what she means, and she laughs softly. That I was afraid, every morning, that someone would finally see the cracks. That they'd notice the smile was tired, the confidence rehearsed. That they'd stop believing in the version of me they needed. She pours 2 small cups of tea. The aroma is sharp and earthy, grounding. As you sip, she continues. Power teaches you to lie without speaking, to nod when your heart says no, to look composed when you're breaking inside. And after a while, you start to believe it too, that the lie is safer than the truth, that the crown is heavier than your own name. She lifts her cup again and looks at you over the rim. But then someone like you arrives and just sits, listens, doesn't ask for anything more than what I'm willing to give. And suddenly, I'm not performing. I'm not explaining. I'm just being. The silence stretches, not awkward, but full of the things neither of you say aloud. You glance toward the letter, still drying on the table. She follows your gaze and nods. Go ahead. You pick it up gently. The parchment is warm from the sun. The handwriting slants slightly, elegant but human. The words are simple. I miss the way my name sounded in my mother's voice. I miss laughing without wondering who was listening. I miss the girl who used to write poetry instead of policy. I miss being able to cry without consequence. And most of all, I miss believing that love didn't have to be earned through sacrifice. You finish reading and look up. She's watching you, her expression unreadable. You fold the letter slowly and place it back where it was. No words. Just a quiet understanding of two people who know what it's like to lose pieces of themselves to the world. She stands and stretches, the rope slipping slightly off her shoulder. Not deliberately, not for effect, just the natural motion of someone forgetting for a moment that they are being seen. She pulls it back up without comment and walks to the window. The view outside is endless. A pale forest touched by frost, glowing beneath the winter sun. She says, I used to think the forest was my enemy. Too wild, too unruled. But now I think it was the only place that never asked me to be anything I wasn't. She places her palm flat against the glass. The cold meets her skin and she smiles faintly. Sometimes I dream of walking into it, disappearing, just for a while, just long enough to remember who I was before all this. You walk over and stand beside her. The two of you reflected in the pane, blurry and doubled by the light. She glances at your reflection and says, you make me feel like I exist outside the story they tell about me. Like I'm not just a chapter in someone else's book. You don't answer. You don't need to. She turns to face you, closer now. The air between you charged but calm. Like something sacred, not urgent. She reaches up and brushes something from your shoulder. Her fingers linger a second longer than necessary. Then she steps back, not away, just enough to breathe. She walks back to the table, picks up the letter, and folds it again. This time, she slips it into a small wooden box lined with other folded papers, some tied with ribbon, some sealed, some frayed at the edges. These are the things I've never said aloud, she tells you. The truths I had to trap in ink so they wouldn't consume me. And yet now that you're here, they don't feel so heavy. You sit beside her again, the box between you. She opens another, reads a line silently, then hands it to you. This one says, I am not ashamed of my loneliness. I am only ashamed of how well I learned to hide it. You read it twice. Once for her, once for yourself. She closes the box and sets it aside. Her eyes are softer now. Not sad, not tired, just open. Do you think we ever really know the people we admire? She asks. Or do we just know the stories they've allowed to survive? You consider the question. Then you say, maybe we only know the parts that resonate, the parts we recognize in ourselves. She nods slowly. Then I hope the part they recognize in me is not the Empress, but the woman who wanted more from the night than just silence. She stands again, walks to the dresser, and opens a drawer. Pulls out a thick journal bound in faded leather. She flips to a page, tears it out, folds it, and hands it to you. For later. When you're ready, not to understand me, but to remember me. You take it without opening it. The weight of the paper is small, but it feels like a trust larger than anything spoken. She steps closer again. This time, her hand finds yours. Not to pull you, not to hold you, just to let you know she is still here, that you are still here, that something in this moment matters beyond its context. She whispers, I don't want to be remembered for the power I held. I want to be remembered for the truth I shared when no one was asking. The fire crackles softly. The air hums. And somewhere outside, a bird begins to sing. Not for the world, not for history, just for the morning, just for you. You sit with her a while longer. No rush, no expectation. Just the slow comfort of company that does not demand explanation. She moves only to stoke the fire, her robe falling open slightly as she leans forward, revealing the outline of a scar on her shoulder. She catches your glance, follows it with her fingers. This, she says, was not from battle, not from betrayal. This was from slipping on wet stone as a child. But they made it into a story about resilience, about divine protection. Even my clumsiness was turned into a myth. She laughs softly. You laugh with her. Not at her, but at the absurdity of how the world builds its heroes. You ask her if she ever wanted to correct them, to rewrite the legends. She shakes her head. No, because truth told too loudly is often mistaken for rebellion. And rebellion, when you are a woman, is mistaken for madness. The tea's long gone, but neither of you rise to refill it. The warmth in the room is enough now, born from proximity and trust. She shifts slightly, crossing her legs beneath her, the robe adjusting with the motion. She leans against you, her head resting just below your collarbone. I used to write poetry about mornings like this, she murmurs. Before the world expected declarations instead. You ask her to tell you one. She pauses, then begins, voice barely louder than breath. The frost upon the window pane, the ache that turns to steam, the silence where the echoes hide, the space between a dream. You wait, thinking more is coming, but she stops there. That was all I had. I never finished it. Maybe because I never knew how it ended. You say, maybe it wasn't supposed to. Maybe the not knowing was the point. She smiles against your chest. You always know how to make things feel less broken. A beat passes. She adds, or maybe you just make the broken things feel honest. You rest your cheek on the top of her head. The fire pops. The snow outside has turned to a dull slush, melting slowly beneath the touch of the sun. A reminder that even the coldest things soften in time. She shifts again, upright now, her eyes searching yours. There is no question, no invitation, just presence. A moment stretched so long it starts to feel like forever. Then she speaks. When they write about me, I hope they write about this. This room, this hour, this quiet. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was mine, and because I chose it, not for glory, for grace. You nod, the words catching in your throat. She reaches up and touches your cheek, not a caress, a confirmation. You are here. I am here. That is enough. You sit like that until the fire dies down and the shadows shift, until her body leans heavier against yours and her breath deepens into sleep. You do not move. You do not need to. The room holds its breath around you. You look at her, not as history will, not as the court did, not as the world demanded, but as she asked, as herself, whole, flawed, glorious. You close your eyes and whisper her name once, not loudly, not for memory, just to let it live in the space between you, just to make it real one more time. Outside, the frost has returned to the glass. A thin veil, a reminder that even the warmth of morning must make way for the cold of evening. But inside, for now, there is only this. Not the empire, not the throne, not the myths. Just the story she chose to share with you, and the quiet that will carry it safely into sleep. The morning light had started to breathe faintly through the edges of the heavy curtains. It was not the bold, golden kind that claimed space loudly. This light was patient, silver-tinted, as if asking permission to enter a room that had known secrets the sun was never meant to see. Catherine stirred beside you, not with the suddenness of a queen rising to command her day, but like someone remembering the body she had once been before duty molded her into something else. You watched her for a moment longer, the way her fingers curled softly against the edge of the blanket, the way her shoulder rose and fell, still bare, still warm. The weight of what had passed between you lingered in the air, not in the silence, but in the way the silence felt. She opened her eyes slowly, and when they found yours, there was no surprise, only recognition. You had not become a stranger in the night. You had become a witness. I had a dream, she whispered. I was standing in a field of mirrors, and every time I turned, I saw someone I used to be. She blinked, thinking. I don't know if it was a nightmare or a gift. You asked what she saw last. She smiled, faint and unguarded. You didn't speak. Didn't need to. You brushed your thumb gently across the back of her hand, and she closed her eyes again, just for a moment, like sealing a thought before it could escape. Eventually, she sat up, her hair falling across her face. She didn't smooth it back. She let it curtain her expression as she reached for the robe draped across the chair. Not the regal one lined with gold, the simpler one, thinner, softer, the one she had worn when you first saw her barefoot in her private quarters. You rose with her, moving together in a silence that had grown comfortable, the kind that said everything that needed to be said had already been shared, at least for now. She gestured toward the far end of the room. There's a place I haven't shown you, she said. A room I only go to when I want to remember who I was before everyone started calling me great. You followed her through a narrow corridor that curved behind a tapestry. The air changed here, cooler, thinner, touched with the scent of old books and the faintest trace of ink. The door was small, barely visible unless you knew where to look. She didn't unlock it. She just pushed, and it gave way with a low creak. Inside, the room was circular. A dome overhead let in light that filtered through colored glass. The floor was stone, worn smooth at the center where feet had stood often. Shelves climbed the walls, packed with scrolls and manuscripts, some tied with ribbons, others left to age naturally. In the middle stood a single chair, and beside it, a desk cluttered with quills and broken wax seals. Catherine stepped into the room like someone entering a chapel, not out of reverence for the place, but out of reverence for the version of herself who had needed it. This is where I wrote my first letter, she said, the one that got me exiled from court for 3 weeks. She ran her fingers over the edge of the desk. I told a foreign ambassador that I thought women made better diplomats because we had more to lose in war. You smiled. And they punished you for that? They called it impertinent, she replied. I called it obvious. She sat in the chair, her legs tucked under her like she used to do when she was younger. You could tell. She looked up at you. Sit. Not as a command. As a request, you sat on the floor across from her. She reached behind the desk and pulled out a worn leather pouch. It unfolded into a map, creases deep, corners frayed. This was the first map I ever drew, she said, not of kingdoms or trade routes, but of ideas. You leaned in. The lines weren't straight. They curved like rivers, looped like thoughts returning to themselves. Words were scrawled in margins: courage, betrayal, longing, silence. At the center was one word, circled twice: truth. It was the only thing I ever wanted, Catherine said. But the older I got, the more I realized how many names truth wears. She traced one of the loops with her fingertip. Power, love, fear. They all think they're the same thing. You asked her which name truth had worn for her last night. She looked at you for a long time. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. Yours. The weight of that settled in the room. Not heavy, not sharp, just present. She folded the map, slower this time, like it had grown more fragile in the time you spent looking at it. She tucked it back into the pouch and set it aside. They'll be waking soon, she said. Ministers, guards, the cooks who pretend not to gossip. And when they do, I'll have to become her again. You asked if she was ready. No, but I'm not afraid. She rose, brushed her robe straight. You walked with her back toward her chamber. The walls seemed less distant now, the palace less echoing. And you realized it wasn't because the place had changed. It was because she had brought you to the parts of it that mattered. The hidden rooms, the forgotten corners, the spaces where she had left pieces of herself tucked between stones and silence. As you entered the main room again, she paused, turned to you. Her hand found your shoulder, steady, unhurried. She looked into you, not just at you. When they speak of me in history, she said, They will talk about the wars, the reforms, the lovers. But they won't know this. They won't know what it meant to be seen at the edge of dawn, without defense, without strategy, just seen. You reached for her hand, held it, not as a promise, not as a farewell, just as truth. Outside, the palace stirred, footsteps on marble, voices gathering in distant halls. The day, inevitable, had begun. She didn't pull away. Not yet, and neither did you. The room felt different now, not because it had changed, but because you had. You had seen its corners, its shadows, the soft places where history slept beside truth. Catherine moved quietly, her gestures no longer queenly but natural, like someone who had remembered how to be still. She picked up a small comb from the vanity and began brushing her hair. You watched her reflection in the mirror, focused, calm. Each stroke pulled something invisible from her, like brushing away yesterday's ceremony. She didn't speak, and neither did you. But in the hush between breaths, the air was full of memory. When she set the comb down, she caught your gaze in the mirror. Come with me. Just that. No smile, no invitation dressed in velvet. Just the certainty of someone who had decided something. You followed her again, not through the grand doors of court or the marble staircases lined with guards, but through another secret passage hidden behind a painted panel. This one led downward, stone steps spiraling into the belly of the palace. It was cool here, quiet, the kind of quiet that swallowed footsteps. At the bottom was a room made of rough stone, lined with wooden crates and old velvet-draped chests. She lit a small lamp, and golden light flickered across shelves of locked boxes. Catherine approached one and removed the lid. Inside, wrapped in blue silk, was a stack of letters bound with twine. She handed them to you. Read one, she said. You hesitated, but she nodded. So you untied the knot and unfolded the top letter. The parchment was old. The ink faded. But the words were clear. It was a letter of longing, not romantic, not overt. But there was something in the way the writer said, I miss the sound of your thinking. It felt more intimate than love. Who wrote this? You asked. She answered, I did. To myself. You looked at her. She continued. I used to write these on nights when the palace was too loud with silence. When I didn't trust anyone but needed to speak. So I wrote to the only person I knew would never lie to me. The girl I used to be. You held the letter carefully, as if it were fragile not from age, but from the honesty it carried. I forgot they existed, she said. Until last night, when I saw myself in your eyes. And I realized I had been looking for her all this time. She placed the rest of the bundle back in the chest, closed the lid, and stood there for a moment. One hand resting gently on the wood, as if saying goodbye. Then she turned. The lamp's light caught her face just right, and in that second, she didn't look royal. She looked like a woman who had been brave enough to meet herself again. You climbed the stairs together in silence. At the top, you stepped into a narrow hallway filled with morning light, the kind that doesn't ask to be noticed but somehow wraps around everything. She stopped at a small alcove where a chair waited near a window that looked out over the gardens. I sit here sometimes, she said, not to think, just to feel the sun on my face and remember I am not made entirely of stone. She sat, pulling her knees up slightly, and leaned her cheek into the sunlight. Come here, she whispered, and you sat beside her. No words now, just warmth, just quiet, just the sound of the palace waking up beyond the walls and the rhythm of your breath falling into hers. Time moved differently here, and you let it. You stay there beside the piano for a while longer, not because the music has not ended, but because the stillness that followed felt just as meaningful. Catherine lingers too, leaning against the edge of the table where she once wrote letters to strangers. She watches you, not as a ruler observing a subject, but as a woman studying a moment she wishes to memorize. Her eyes are softer here, no longer sharpened by politics or expectation. She speaks again, barely louder than the creak of floorboards. I used to wonder if I would be remembered by the things I built or by the things I destroyed. But lately, I think the real legacy we leave is found in the moments no one ever records. The way someone touches your shoulder at the right time or says nothing when silence is what you need the most. You nod. You understand. It is not the grand gestures that survive history. It is the quiet decisions, the invisible tenderness, the hours spent choosing kindness over control. You look around the room again. The air smells faintly of paper and lavender. A quill rests beside an unfinished letter. Words left mid-thought like a breath she forgot to finish. You pick it up without asking, and she watches you curiously, but does not stop you. It is addressed to no one. Yet the salutation reads, "Dearest you." The rest of the page is filled with fragmented memories. A description of a sunrise over the Neva River. A dream about climbing a tree barefoot. A moment where she imagined what it might feel like to disappear into the crowd at a winter fair. You realize the letter is not to a person, but to the part of herself she fears might one day vanish completely. You fold it carefully and set it aside, feeling the weight of it settle inside you. Not as burden, but as understanding. "Would you like to walk the gardens again?" she asks. "Only this time I want to show you my favorite place." You follow her out a different corridor, this one narrower with stone walls etched in places by initials. Long faded, you pass through a door into a smaller courtyard than the one from earlier. Here the roses grow untamed, their petals spilling onto gravel paths and over low marble benches. Catherine walks ahead, trailing her fingers over the edges of blossoms that bend slightly under her touch. "This is where I used to come when I needed to cry or think, or just be without being anything," she says. "No one followed me here. They all thought I preferred the main gardens for their symmetry and ceremony, but that was never me. Not really. This was my rebellion. A garden that bloomed without permission, without trimming, without applause." She sits on one of the benches and gestures for you to join her. As you do, she pulls her knees up slightly, resting her chin on them like a girl, not a queen. The sky above you stretches wide and pale. The air smells of wet earth and old secrets. She tilts her head toward you and asks softly, "Did you ever feel like you were meant to live more than one life? Like the one you have is only half of a story?" You say yes, not because you are trying to comfort her, but because you have felt that too in the spaces between days, in the silences. Before sleep, in the way certain people feel familiar, even when you have just met them. She smiles, then really smiles, and the years between you and her age and power and legend melt away. "Let me show you something," she says. She leads you to the edge of the courtyard, to a small wrought iron gate that opens onto a staircase winding downward. You descend into coolness, damp stone, and the hush of things forgotten. The stairs lead to an underground library lit by glass lanterns hanging low. The shelves are filled with books in dozens of languages, some with bindings falling apart, some wrapped in cloth, some with pages missing, entire works handwritten by women who dared to dream before they were permitted to do. "So this was my sanctuary," she says. "Every ruler had their war room. I had this a place to read, to write, to become more than what they allowed me to be." You run your hand along the spine of one of the books. Its title is faded, but the pages still whisper when you flip them. A memoir in a language you do not recognize, but the feeling of it is familiar, as if it too has waited for someone to listen. Catherine watches you again, not with expectation, but with recognition. You are someone who does not flinch at the weight of memory. Someone who knows that truth is not always found in history books, but in the spaces between them. She steps closer this time, not out of desire or ceremony, but out of trust. You feel her breath before you hear her voice again. "Sometimes I wonder if the reason people fall in love with ghosts is because they listen more than the living do not speak." You simply reach for her hand, not to hold it, but to steady it. She takes yours, not because she is fragile, but because it is finally. Aloud and together, you stand in the heart of a forgotten library. Beneath the palace, above a garden full of wild roses. with the stories of hundreds of untold lives surrounding you like a cathedral of quiet rebellion. You are not just visitors here. You are witnesses to the version of her history never told. The one where power was not in conquest, but in gentleness, not in decree, but in presence. Not in what was ruled, but in what was remembered. You let the moment stretch because some truths are too sacred to hurry. You remain in that underground library a little longer, letting the silence wrap around, both of you like a shared blanket. It is not the cold kind of quiet that lives in empty hallways or sealed tombs, but the soft quiet that only exists when two people are no longer pretending. Catherine does not rush you. She moves slowly between the shelves, dragging her fingers along spines and corners as if they might whisper to her again. She stops at a book bound in deep burgundy, its cover worn smooth, and opens it carefully. Inside are watercolored pages, delicate portraits of women, some crowned, some bareheaded, some mid-laughter, some mid-tears. They were my teachers, she says quietly. Some of them ruled, some of them ran, some of them simply survived. But they all taught me something. You move closer and look over her shoulder. The faces are unfamiliar, but their eyes feel timeless. Catherine turns a page and stops. Her hand hovers over the painting, like it might flake away if she touches it. This one, she whispers, was a girl from a village outside Moscow. They say she saved 30 lives by hiding people beneath her floorboards. During a raid, no one ever gave her a medal. No one built her a statue, but she wrote a poem once about the sound of hope in the dark. I read it when I was 16, and for the first time. I wanted to be remembered not for being loud, but for being kind. You nod. She closes the book with a softness that feels like respect. She doesn't shelve it. She places it on a table beside a candle, like it deserves to breathe a while longer in the light. Then she turns to you and smiles, not the way royalty smiles, not with poise, but with vulnerability. Would you like to write something here? She asks. This library accepts more than books. It welcomes memory. You pause, then walk to a blank journal left near the edge of a shelf. You sit with it for a moment, your hand hovering over the page. You write not a declaration, not a tale of battles or victories, but a small moment you remember, a scent from childhood, a quiet word that once saved you, a promise you made to yourself and kept when no one was watching. When you finish, you do not sign it. You simply close the journal and slide it between two others. Catherine says nothing, but you notice the corners of her mouth lift in approval. You both walk back up the staircase slowly, neither of you ready to rejoin the surface, but knowing the moment had already changed you. The sky has turned gold with the setting sun, casting long shadows across the garden. The roses glow like embers. The palace beyond stands tall again, its towers catching firelight, but somehow it feels smaller now, less like a monument, more like a backdrop to something more real. Catherine leads you toward the edge of the garden, where a small stone bench waits beneath an overgrown archway. She sits again, this time with her feet tucked beneath her like a child curled in thought. Do you think people can ever truly know each other? She asks. Not just the parts we present, not the curated versions, the full shape of a soul. You think for a while, then answer, maybe not fully, but sometimes just trying to know someone is the closest thing to loving them completely. She exhales slowly, as if you've given her something she didn't know she needed. She pulls something from her pocket, a thin ribbon, once white, now faded to ivory. She twirls it between her fingers. I wore this the day I realized my crown would always be heavier than my voice. She laughs softly, not bitterly, just with the kind of softness that only comes from looking back without wanting to return. She hands it to you, not ceremoniously, but like someone passing a pebble or a secret. You take it carefully, not to possess it, but to honor what it meant. The sun dips lower, and Catherine looks toward the horizon. You follow her gaze, where the clouds are tinged with purple, and the distant bells from a nearby chapel begin to chime. You know, I never really believed in happy endings, she says quietly. I always thought they were stories we told children to make the world less sharp. But now I think maybe a happy ending isn't something grand or final. Maybe it's just finding someone who sees the parts of you that history forgot. You say nothing. Just reach over and let your hand find hers again. Not for comfort, not for romance, just because it feels like the truest thing to do. She leans her head against your shoulder again, and for a while, neither of you move. The garden fades into dusk. The stars begin to blink awake. The world continues around you, but inside that moment, time bends. Somewhere a servant walks the halls, unaware that the Empress sits barefoot under the stars, with ink on her hands and dirt on her hem. Somewhere a historian is writing another version of her story, one with footnotes and timelines and none of this. But you know the truth. You know about the girl who wrote letters to villagers and hid books in underground rooms. You know about the ribbon she kept in her pocket and the song she listened to when no one else was near. You know how she looked when she wasn't Catherine the Great, but just Catherine. And that truth sits quietly in your chest like a second heartbeat. The night grows cooler and she stands, brushing the leaves from her dress. She looks at you, then tilts her head slightly. "Walk with me," she says. "Not as queen and subject, not as symbols, just as us." You rise and follow her down the stone path. Your steps aligned, the rhythm easy. Between you, nothing needs to be explained. There is no protocol, no curtain, no act, just presence, just witnessing, just quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to understand why some people are remembered, not because of what they did, but because of how they made someone feel when the rest of the world had forgotten how. You walk alongside her back toward the palace, though it no longer feels like a place of rules and titles, but more like a museum of moments. Some collected, some stolen. The corridors stretch wider now, or maybe it is just the way your footsteps echo more freely. She does not speak at first. Her fingers brush against the tapestry as you pass, one depicting battles and parades, a reminder of the legacy others tried to make her wear like armor. She pauses before it, head tilted thoughtfully. "They always painted the horses larger than the men," she says softly. "I think that tells you everything about what mattered to them." You follow her up a stairwell, not grand this time, but narrow and winding, the kind of stair servants would used to pass unnoticed. The walls are close, the air cooler. "Here I used to run up these," she says, laughing. "Once when I was 16, I tripped and scraped my chin, trying to beat the cook to the top. She won, I bled. And then we both laughed like drunkards and hid from my governess in the pantry for hours." At the top of the staircase is a door, not gilded, not guarded, just wood worn by years and weather. She pushes it open, and you step into a room filled with light. It is her painting room, not one filled with portraits of nobility or battle scenes, but canvases of rivers of empty chairs, of windows. Looking into windows, the brushstrokes are not delicate, they are desperate, honest, unpolished, and full of feeling. "I never showed anyone these," she says. "I did not paint to impress. I painted to remember, to release, to say things I could not speak aloud." She walks to a canvas covered with a cloth and pulls it away, revealing a painting of her younger self. Not in royal dress, but in a nightgown, sitting on a windowsill, eyes wide with longing. It is not perfect, but it is her in a way no court artist could capture. You stare at it, and she watches you. Not the way a painter might, but the way a person might watch someone reading their diary, hoping they understand, hoping they did not turn away. "I was always afraid of being forgotten, not as an empress, but as a woman, as a mind, as a feeling." She says, "I wanted someone to know I existed beyond the crowns, beyond the rumors, beyond the cold statues." You turn to her and say simply, "I see you." She exhales like a weight she did not know she carried, just slipped off her shoulders. She walks over to a smaller canvas, this one blank. She picks up a brush and offers it to you. "Paint something," she says. "Anything. It does not have to be beautiful, just true." You hesitate, but take it. You dip the brush into a deep blue and draw a single line, then another, not forming anything recognizable, just the rhythm of movement, the echo of emotion. And when you are done, she looks at it, smiles, and says it is exactly enough. The light from the tall windows fades into twilight, and she does not reach for candles instead. She lets the dark in slowly, gradually, until the room is bathed in soft shadow, the kind that makes everything feel more intimate, more secret. She sits beside you on a cushioned bench, hands clasped loosely in her lap. Do you ever wonder if the world we build will understand us centuries from now, she asks, or if they will only see what fits their stories? You nod. You wonder that too. About letters you have written, memories you have shared, people you have loved. What of it will survive, and what of it will be rewritten by time? She leans against your shoulder again, her voice a little more fragile. If someone finds this room one day long after we are gone, I hope they feel peace. I hope they know it was never about the power. It was about the trying, about the reaching, about finding someone who would hold the brush with you, even if the picture never made it to a wall. The silence returns, but this time it is companionable, not heavy. She closes her eyes, and you sit beside her unmoving. Not because you must, but because you want to. Because the night has not yet ended. And neither has the feeling that something important is happening, even if the world never names it. You stay there beside her as the final light fades, until the shapes of the room blur into shades of blue and violet, and her breath grows slower, like the room itself is helping her rest. She does not sleep, but she is near it, somewhere between memory and dreaming. Her head still rests on your shoulder, and you can feel the soft weight of her presence, not heavy but grounding. She says nothing, and neither do you. Because this part of the night is not about words. It is about what lives in the space between them. Eventually, she stirs slowly, stretching her hands before her, like she's returning to her body from someplace far away. Her fingers brush yours again briefly, and then she stands walking across the darkened room. Without lighting a candle, instead, she opens a drawer and pulls out a worn leather notebook, not gilded, not monogrammed. It is held together by a thin thread and time. This, she says, turning it in her hands, is where I wrote everything that I was never allowed to say. Letters, thoughts, dreams, fears, none of it meant for public eyes. Not even for history, just for me, but tonight I would like to share some of it with you. She walks back to you and sits again, holding the book open in her lap. She flips through the pages with care until she finds a spot where her fingers linger. She clears her throat softly and begins reading. I dreamed once that I was no one, not a princess, not a wife, not a mother, not a ruler. I was simply a woman in a garden, sitting with my knees drawn up and a book in my hands and the sun on my skin. And in that dream, no one needed anything from me, and I felt beautiful for no reason at all. She closes the book and looks at you. I do not know if that dream will ever be moored on paper, but sitting here with you feels like the closest I have come. You want to say something, but instead you reach over and gently close the book, placing your hand over hers. Not to silence her, but to share in the quiet that follows, because the truth in her words deserves stillness, not response. She breathes out slowly and then leans her head back to look at the ceiling, high and arched and painted with stars. Not real ones, but imagined constellations, created by an artist long gone. I used to count these, she says. Each time I felt trapped in a conversation I could not escape. Each star was a second closer to silence, to the door, to myself. You look up and count them too, silently, and for a moment you both become children hiding under the vastness of a pretend sky, hoping the world outside might forget you for just a moment longer. Then she stands again, this time with more purpose, and walks to the far corner of the room where a small wooden cabinet sits. She opens it slowly, revealing a box inside, and she carries it back to where you sit. It is simple, plain, and she places it between you. Inside are keepsakes, a ribbon, a locket, a pressed flower, a piece of parchment with a scribbled note, and a tiny hand-carved chess piece. Each item its own story, its own weight, its own secret. This, she says, is not the treasury of a queen. It is the memory box of a woman. I always said I had no time for such sentimentality, and yet here it is, proof that I never really stopped being human. She lifts the chess piece first and rolls it in her fingers. He gave me this when I beat him in 3 moves, a foreign ambassador with more pride than skill. He accused me of cheating. I told him that underestimating a woman was its own kind of surrender. You both laugh quietly, not because it is a grand tale, but because it is small and true and unexpectedly tender. Then she offers the box to you, and without words you add something of your own. Not a token from your past, but something from the moment. A ribbon she had set aside, a sprig of lavender from her table, a tiny drawing on a slip of paper, whatever you choose. She watches as you place it among her memories and closes the lid as if to seal the night within it. The candles remain unlit, but neither of you need them. The darkness is kind now, filled with understanding and warmth. And as she settles back beside you, her voice softer than before, she says, "Do you think people are meant to be remembered or simply felt?" You answer only by reaching for her hand again, fingers woven without fanfare, just presence, and in the stillness that follows, you feel the night shift slightly, like the story has turned a page, and the next chapter waits quietly in the wings. You follow her quietly down another hallway, this one unfamiliar, lined not with portraits or columns, but with tall windows where the moonlight spills in like silver. Threads across the marble floor, the silence between you has shifted. It is no longer the silence of uncertainty, but of reverence, like the hush in a chapel before someone speaks. A truth too fragile for noise. The palace feels asleep around you, not just the people within it. But the walls, the statues, the echoes, it is as if the place itself is holding its breath. She walks slowly now, her steps careful, as if she too senses the gravity of what lies ahead. She stops before a pair of tall wooden doors. They are not gilded, not marked, just old, their grain worn smooth by years of being touched by people who never knew what waited beyond. "This," she says, turning to you, "is the room I never showed anyone, not even the ones I loved, because it holds the part of me that no one ever asked about." She pushes the door open and steps inside, and you follow. And what you find there is not what you expect. It is a room filled with music, not playing, but visible sheet after sheet of handwritten notes pinned to the walls, draped across tables, tucked in the bookshelves. They flutter slightly in the breeze from a cracked window, and you realize they are all songs written by her or for her melodies. Never performed versus never sung. "I used to compose," she says softly, "before they told me it was unbecoming. I wrote lullabies for a child. I never had sonatas for the garden when the roses bloomed in defiance of war harmonies for the way rain sounded on the library roof." She picks up a small harp from the corner, worn and delicate, and sits by the window, her fingers brush the strings with a gentleness that feels like apology, and the sound that follows is not perfect, but it is full of soul. She plays for a while, not looking at you, not watching anything, just lost in the sound of her own memory, and you sit and let the notes wash over you, the way a shoreline lets the tide rise and fall and rise again. When she finishes, she does not speak, and neither do you, because the music has not really stopped. It just lives in the walls now, in the space between you. She sets the harp aside and looks out the window. The garden is visible below, a faint outline of paths and trees under the moonlight. Do you think she begins and then pauses? Do you think there are versions of us that exist only in the spaces we keep hidden, like this room, entire selves that never got a name or a title or a stage? You nod slowly because you have felt it too, the ache of unlived lives, the quiet longing for someone to find your song and say, "I hear this, and I know it was you." She smiles, not with sadness, but with recognition, and then she walks to a shelf and pulls down a journal. Its spine cracked, its corners soft. She hands it to you without ceremony and says, "I want you to read this, not now, but when you are alone. It is not history. It is not royal. It is just me before the world told me who to be." You take it, holding it like something sacred, and tuck it into your coat, not to claim it, but to carry it the way one carries a letter from someone who once knew them fully. She steps back to the harp and plays one final note, letting it ring out across the room and into the night. Then she turns to you and says, I think it is time we returned, not because the story is over, but because the night is changing. You follow her through the corridor again, the journal warm against your chest, like it knows you now carry something living. The palace hums with a silence that feels less like sleep and more like breath held in awe. You sense that everything you've seen tonight exists outside the official record. There are no ledgers, no court scribes, no grand declarations. Just the curve of her voice in the dark, the hush of candlelight she never lit, the fingerprint she left on a harp string. She leads you not toward her royal chambers, but to a narrow spiral staircase tucked behind a velvet curtain. It winds downward, and with each step, the air grows cooler. Damp stone replaces marble. The echo of footsteps becomes sharper. She carries a single lantern now, its glow flickering softly against the walls. When you reach the bottom, she turns and speaks without looking at you. "This part," she says, "is the reason I wanted you to stay." The door ahead is iron and arched, weathered by time and secrecy. She unlocks it with a small brass key that hangs around her neck, and the door creaks open into what looks like a private study. But you know it is more than that. This is not a room meant to be shared. It is a room meant to be confessed to. The shelves here are filled with things you recognize and things you do not. Foreign coins, torn letters, half-burnt maps, a mask of ivory, small vials of unknown perfume. Some items are labeled. Others are wrapped in cloth. Each feels like a truth she was not allowed to speak aloud. She moves to the far wall and pulls down a map, not of countries or conquests, but of constellations. Not the kind used for sailing or astronomy. A different map entirely, one drawn by hand, showing stars and paths that don't exist in any known sky. "I made this," she says, "when I felt the world I was born into no longer fit the shape of who I had become. It is a map of where I wished I could go. Every point of light is a moment I wanted to live again, differently." She traces one star with her finger. "That one," she says, "was the first time I disobeyed a direct order and felt alive because of it. That one was when I danced barefoot in the snow before I became queen. That one," she pauses, "that one hasn't happened yet." She looks at you. You do not need to ask what that final one means. Somewhere above, a bell chimes. Not loud, not royal, just a clock doing its duty. She closes the map and places it gently on the table. Then she turns and walks toward you, her face half in shadow. "Before this night ends," she says, "I want you to understand something. Power never protected me. It dressed me up in fear and called it grace. But what you saw tonight, what you touched, was mine. The me that existed before the thrones and titles in history." She places her hand over your heart. That version of me only needed to be witnessed. Not remembered, not recorded. Just felt. And somehow, you know this was the real secret all along. Not the palace, not the paintings, not the policies or rebellions or lovers, but the simple, undignified truth that even the most powerful women in history still long to be seen as more than a name in someone else's story. She steps back and opens the iron door once more, the light behind her spilling into the corridor. She waits for you to pass, but when you do, she does not follow immediately. Instead, she lingers there in the threshold, her eyes closed, her head tilted slightly toward the stone arch like she is listening to the echo of a life she almost had. Then she whispers something too soft to hear and closes the door behind her. You walk through the corridor alone now. The iron door closed behind you, and the echo of her final whisper still lingering like perfume in the air. Whatever she said was not meant for history, not even for you, and yet somehow it finds a home inside your chest, soft and steady like a memory you have not made. Yet the palace feels different in this hour. Less like a monument and more like a ghost of itself. The walls do not speak, but they remember. They hold the night in their silence and let you pass without question. You do not rush the walk. You let your steps fall gently, as if your feet understand what your heart is still trying to catch up to. Something changed tonight. Not just in her, but in you too. And though the world beyond these halls will wake soon and resume its rituals and records, you know that none of it can undo what was shared in the folds of this quiet time. You come to a window, tall and arched, the same one you remember passing earlier when the moon was rising. Now it is low, fading behind distant trees, and the sky begins to shift into the soft tones of morning, that pale blue that carries both an ending and a beginning. You lean on the windowsill, looking out, and for a moment you let yourself feel the weight of what you are leaving behind. There is no grief in it, not really, only a kind of fullness that aches because it is real, because something rare happened here, something unrepeatable. You hear footsteps behind you, but you do not turn right away. You know it is her before she speaks. Her presence has always arrived like that, like an old melody finding the chorus again. She stands beside you, her arm brushing yours. And together you watch the light change without speaking, because sometimes watching is a kind of prayer. She finally breaks the silence, not with a farewell or a declaration, but with something smaller and far more human. Do you think she asks that the parts of us we hide, the parts no one ever names, could still live on in someone else's memory? You consider the question and then answer without hesitation, only if they were ever truly seen. She nods slowly and then lifts her gaze to the sky as if she's reading the future in the light that is coming. She looks different now, not less royal but more real, her hair slightly undone, her eyes softer, her shoulders no longer carrying the invisible armor of a sovereign. She turns to face you fully, and for the first time since this began, you see her. Not as Catherine the Great, not as Empress, not even as a woman with secrets, but as someone who once stood barefoot in snow with music in her head, and no one to tell her she could not be free. "Thank you," she says, "not for listening, not for staying, but for not turning away." You reach for her hand again, not to hold it, but to steady the goodbye that now sits between you. And when she lets go, there is no ceremony, no kiss, no bow. Only the quiet grace of something understood without being spoken. She steps back and offers a final smile, one that carries the weight of everything she could not say aloud. And then she disappears around the corner, leaving only the hush of the palace and the sound of morning birds beginning to wake. You take one last look out the window, the light now bright enough to paint the world in color again, and you know it is time to leave. You walk the long hallway alone this time, not with sorrow, but with reverence. Your steps no longer hesitant but sure, because while the story may be over, what it left behind in you is not. You step out into the courtyard, the stones cool underfoot and the scent of dew clinging to the air. You look back just once at the palace, not to see her, but to see what it gave you, and then you turn toward the gate, your coat heavy with the journal in your pocket, and something else, something that does not have a name. As you walk away, the world feels different, not louder, not brighter, just more honest. Because now you know what it means to be led into a truth that history never told, and that truth lives in you now. You do not walk quickly, though the world beyond the palace calls to you with its usual noise and motion. You do not hurry, because to rush now would be to break the spell. And this is a story that deserves to fade slowly like the last notes of a forgotten song. You carry it with you, not just in your mind, but in your body, in the way your breath has deepened since she spoke, in the way your shoulders carry less and more at once, in the way your hands feel like they've held something sacred. The path to the gate winds through the garden, the same garden you first crossed, but it is different now. The light touches the petals in a way that reminds you of her fingers on the harp, soft, certain, barely there, and yet unforgettable. The breeze moves the leaves, and for a second you think you hear her laugh, the memory echoing as if the roses remember too. You stop by the low stone wall where you once sat and look out over the fields beyond the estate. They stretch wide and golden, the morning sun reaching across them like a promise. You take the journal from your coat, not to read it, but to feel its presence once more. The weight of someone else's truth entrusted to your care. You do not need to open it to know what it holds. You saw it in her eyes. You heard it in her silence. There are footsteps behind you again. This time quieter, lighter. Not hers, but someone else. A servant, perhaps, a messenger. A figure sent to escort you to the edge of the world you now must leave. They do not speak, only nod once and wait at a distance, giving you one last moment alone. You close your eyes, not to escape, but to remember with clarity, to let the night live a little longer in the darkness behind your eyelids. You see her again, not on a throne, not in silk, but in the quiet room of music, the flickering candlelight of the bath, the gentle way she touched the starlit map of dreams she would never walk. You see her standing at the threshold of that iron door, whispering to the stone, not a farewell but a spell, a protection for a version of herself no one would ever write into the royal record. You open your eyes and the world is waiting, but it does not rush you. It understands now that time is not just measured by minutes and crowns and wars, but by the breath between two people who saw one another without armor. You walk to the servant and nod once, and they begin the slow walk down the gravel path that leads out of the royal grounds. With every step you feel the palace receding, not just physically but emotionally, the walls that held you now releasing you, the weight of us. What happened here settling gently into your memory. And then it happens, the final turn, the point where you can no longer see the palace, where the gates rise before you, where beyond them is everything familiar and ordinary and unchanged. You hesitate, not because you are afraid, but because you understand that what you carry now is invisible, and the world may not believe it exists, but you do. You place your hand inside your coat where the journal rests and take a breath. This is how stories survive, you think? Not in books, not in speeches, but in the quiet keeping of someone who lived them. You step through the gates and into the world. The wind picks up. The sky is fully awake. And the day begins, but somewhere behind you, in a place that no longer belongs to you, a harp sings one final note. Not for her, not for you, just for the truth that found its voice in the silence between the chapters. And with that, the story ends, fully, quietly, completely. You walk along the edge of the countryside, far from the glittering sprawl of palaces and powdered whispers, but closer somehow to something that feels real. The path is uneven, scattered with stones and thick with the scent of wild herbs crushed beneath your boots. You notice the way the morning light slips through the thinning branches overhead, dappling the dirt in golden streaks like spilled honey. The palace is gone now, tucked behind memory and distance, and though your feet grow heavier with each step, your heart carries a strange lightness. You are no longer just a shadow walking beside a crown. You are something else entirely now. You are a witness. You keep your pace steady, the pressed journal still tucked inside your coat, close to your chest. You haven't opened it since you left, not because you fear what's inside, but because the memory of her voice is still too fresh, still echoing in your mind like the fading hum of a harp string after it has been plucked. You know what it holds. The pages don't whisper anymore. They rest, content, knowing they've done their part. The road turns to gravel, then to soft grass, and finally to nothing at all. Just a stretch of land that hasn't been claimed by map or man. You stop for a moment, glancing back. Though the palace is no longer in sight, you're not checking for it. You're checking for the feeling. But even that has begun to change. It's no longer a pull. It's a hum low and deep in your ribs, like something sacred has settled inside you and refuses to leave. Up ahead, you spot the remains of an old hunting lodge, its roof sagging, its walls kissed by vines, the kind of place that feels forgotten by time. You approach quietly, not because you're afraid, but because quiet feels respectful here, like raising your voice would startle the ghosts. Inside, the air is cool, still laced with the scent of aged wood and moss. Dust dances in slanted rays of light. A broken chair leans in the corner like it remembers being sat on. You sit on the edge of a windowsill, your hands resting on the journal again. And for the first time since she disappeared behind those palace doors, you open it. The ink hasn't faded, not yet. Her words rise up from the page as if spoken directly into the hush of this forgotten room. You run your fingers along a line she once traced herself. A name. A truth. A moment so small it could have been overlooked. But not by you. Not anymore. You close the journal and set it on the windowsill beside you. The silence wraps around your shoulders like a shawl. Not cold, but comforting. You lean back, eyes half closed, and allow yourself to remember. Not just her laugh, which always came a beat too soon. Too real for someone born into gold. Not just the way she looked at you when everyone else turned away, but the quiet things. The weight of her hand when it rested on yours. The way her breath caught when you told her she was not a symbol, not a crown, not a duty, just her. You drift for a while, not sleeping, not quite dreaming. Somewhere in between. In that soft space where time folds gently around you, you remember the bath. The way the water steamed, curling against her skin like mist rising off a lake at dawn. How she sank into it not like a queen, but like a woman shedding layers that never truly belonged to her. You remember her voice, low and velvet soft, telling you about a childhood no painting ever captured. About a brother she once loved. About a song her mother sang before the world turned cold. She had been so open that night. Vulnerable, yes, but not weak. There was power in that honesty. A strength most would never understand. She had offered you her truth, bare and quiet, without asking for anything in return. And you took it, not to possess, but to protect. That's what stays with you now, more than anything. That sacred exchange between two souls in the hush of candlelight. No witnesses. No judgments. Just being. You rise from the windowsill and step back outside. The journal once again secure inside your coat. The sun has climbed higher, but it's not harsh. It warms your shoulders, coaxes out the scent of nearby lavender, and stirs the tall grass into gentle waves. You walk again, this time toward a forest that seems to welcome you with open arms. The trees part just enough to let you through, their leaves rustling like distant applause. The path narrows, and yet your mind expands. With each step, you feel more rooted, more alive. You come to a clearing where the forest opens its palms to the sky. A small stone bench sits beneath a tree heavy with blossoms. You recognize this place. Not from maps or stories, but from something older. A dream, a whisper, a flicker of memory that might not even be yours. You sit, your fingers resting on the smooth curve of the bench, and you wait. For what? You don't know. But waiting feels right here. Birdsong fills the air. Not the shrill cries of court birds locked in gilded cages, but wild, earthy melodies that rise and fall without rhythm or reason. You close your eyes and breathe it in, letting the sound settle deep inside you. Somewhere in the distance, you think you hear water. A stream, perhaps. Or maybe just the echo of a bath long since cooled. You can't be sure. And then, as if summoned by memory alone, you feel her beside you. Not in body, not even in ghost, but in presence. Like the air has shifted, made room for something sacred. You do not turn. You do not speak. You simply sit, allowing the silence to hold you both. The moment stretches, not tense, but infinite. A shared stillness that says everything words cannot. And when it ends, it does so gently. Like the closing of a book you were never ready to finish. You open your eyes. The clearing remains. The tree, the blossoms, the bench. But something has changed. Not out there, in you. Something deeper. Something unnameable. You rise once more, the weight of the journal no heavier than it was before, but somehow more precious. as though it too has borne witness to something unspeakably tender. You walk away from the clearing without looking back, not because you don't care, but because you do. And you know that some memories are too sacred to stare at directly. The forest parts for you again, and as you step back onto the main road, you realize something simple and true. You are no longer walking away. You are walking toward. You return to the road not as a traveler, but as someone who carries something unseen. The breeze catches your coat as you walk, and for a moment, you think it's her again, brushing past you like she used to in hallways and gardens, her presence always known by touch before sight. The air hums with summer's edge now. The birds have stopped singing, not from silence, but because they've said all they needed to. Their songs linger in the leaves like lullabies left behind in case you forget how to rest. You won't forget. Not now. Not ever. The road curves past a narrow ridge where tall grass sways over the edge of a long slope, overlooking a shallow valley speckled with sheep and sun. A shepherd leans lazily against a crooked tree, hat pulled low, unaware of the story walking past him. You think about how many people passed her in their lifetime without knowing. How many saw the ribbons and gowns and rumors and never saw her. The real her. You did. You remember the night she told you her fears not in grand declarations, but in the way her fingers curled inward when she fell asleep beside you. There was a stillness in her, beneath everything, beneath the lace and the posture and the duty. A soft, aching stillness, and you touched it. Not because she let you, but because she trusted you to. You pass a gate, rusted iron and barely standing. Beyond it lies an orchard wild and overgrown, the trees heavy with unpicked fruit. Apples hang too low, overripe and bruised, and the ground beneath them is sweet with rot and bees. You step through the gate, not because you plan to, but because your feet move as if guided by memory. She once told you she had a dream of running through an orchard barefoot, not as a queen, not even as a woman, just as a person. No one chasing her, no one waiting. Just the fruit and the wind and the soil beneath her feet. You walk deeper into the orchard, brushing branches aside as sunlight flickers through the leaves like candlelight through stained glass. Everything feels hushed here. You pluck a small apple from a branch, soft and bruised, and sit beneath the tree. You don't eat it. You hold it. The way she once held your face, gently, as though it might disappear if gripped too tightly. You sit a long time. The sun crosses further west, the light going gold and low, and you let your eyes close, just for a moment. But you see her again. Not as she was on the throne, or in the tub, or even in the candlelit corridors of that endless palace, but standing here, in this orchard, her hair loose, her feet bare, laughing. You don't reach for her. You don't speak. You simply watch. And the moment she sees you, she smiles, not in surprise, in recognition. You open your eyes. The orchard is quiet again. But that smile, that recognition, it stays. You leave the apple beneath the tree, a quiet offering, and continue walking. The orchard gives way to another path, narrower and lined with hedges. A child's toy, old and wooden, lies forgotten in the dirt. You wonder whose it was, what story it carried, whether it was ever loved or simply lost. Everything holds a history, even you. Farther ahead, you reach a tiny cottage with smoke curling from its chimney, a dog barking gently from somewhere behind a fence. An old woman sweeps her stoop, her eyes flicking to you, and then away. You nod. She nods. Nothing more is needed. You pass her by. You shadow long against the stone walls. You feel seen in a way that has nothing to do with being noticed. Beyond the cottage lies a quiet hill, and at its crest stands a solitary tree. Its branches reach wide, as if trying to remember something it once held. You climb toward it slowly, your boots pressing deep into the earth. At the top, the view unfolds like a painting, fields and rivers and winding paths, all stitched together in greens and golds. You sit beneath the tree, and let the wind find your face. And that's when you begin to write. Not in the journal she gave you. That one remains untouched now, a relic of what passed. But on fresh pages, blank and waiting. You do not write what happened. You write how it felt. You write about the cold of the tiles beneath your feet, the warmth of her hand, the way she looked at you when no one else did. You write about how silence can be sacred, about how some stories aren't meant to be told in words, but in memory. You write for hours, the sky darkening slowly, the stars rising one by one like shy truths finding courage. You write until your fingers ache, until your breath slows, until the pages are heavy with the weight of a love that never needed a crown to be real. When you finally stop, you press your hand to the paper, grounding it, sealing it. Not for anyone else to read, just to say, I was here, I felt this. You look out at the horizon. Somewhere, beyond what you can see, people are speaking her name again. They're discussing politics and portraits and power. They're arguing about the things she said and the things she didn't. They're writing histories, but not your history. Yours lives in the space between words, in the softness behind the curtain, in the press of a warm hand beneath water, in the way she smiled without needing a reason. You lie back against the roots of the tree and stare at the stars. They look different now, not brighter, just more familiar, as if you finally remembered where you came from and where she went. You stay like that a long while, not asleep, not fully awake, somewhere in between. And when you finally rise, the night wraps around you like a cloak. You gather the pages you've written and press them into the folds of your coat. You take nothing else, not the journal, not the apple, not even her memory, because you no longer need to carry her. She's already part of you. The road ahead waits. And this time, it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like the beginning of the story you were always meant to live. You walk with the rhythm of someone who is no longer searching for a destination. The sky above is velvet blue, the stars pricking through one by one like old friends arriving late, but always welcome. Your steps are steady, unhurried, quiet like breath after tears. The path before you doesn't twist or wind dramatically anymore. It simply opens, like a page turned at the right moment. You pass fields left fallow, soft with wild clover, where the wind moves in waves, brushing the earth like a hand smoothing a bedsheet. And with each gust, you remember something small. The way her sleeve slipped down her shoulder. The way she laughed like she didn't believe she was allowed to. The way her gaze lingered at your mouth before she said anything brave. These are not memories you cling to. They come on their own. Gentle, familiar. And when they pass, they leave something behind, like dew on your collar. In the distance, you hear a bell. Faint. Not a church bell, but something smaller. A town square, perhaps. A market packing up. The clink of metal and tired laughter. The sound of life resuming. It reminds you that while your story with her felt like a secret stitched into a tapestry, the world keeps weaving onward. You reach a wooden fence, half collapsed, and step over it without thought. Beyond it lies a meadow bathed in moonlight, and in the middle of it, an old stone bench, cracked by time, but still standing. You sit, not because you're weary, but because something inside you wants to witness the stillness, to be present, to say quietly, I am still here. You open the fresh journal again, the one you began beneath the tree, and you write, not about her this time, about you, the you she uncovered, the version of yourself that listened more than spoke, that felt more than feared, that touched without needing to be held back. You write about how love does not always announce itself with trumpets and vows. Sometimes it arrives barefoot, in a whisper, in the way someone lets their guard down and leans just enough that you know they believe in you. You write about the silence, the rare kind that feels full rather than empty, the silence that made the fire crackle louder and the skin feel warmer and the world slow down just enough for two people to see each other. Really see. And you write about what comes after. About leaving the palace not in defiance, not in sorrow, but in completion. About letting a chapter close without needing to scratch it into stone. About how memory changes, not because it fades, but because you learn how to carry it without bleeding. You pause, pen held between your fingers, and look up. The stars are brighter now. The moon has shifted higher, and the clouds, lazy and thin, drift like thoughts that no longer need resolution. A small fox pads into the meadow, nose low to the ground. It pauses when it sees you, but does not run. Instead, it tilts its head as if to ask whether you're part of the stillness too. And you are. You think of Catherine then. Not the Empress, not the scandal, not the myth, but the woman, the friend, the soul who once looked at you in a candlelit room and chose to tell the truth when she didn't have to. You remember her quiet strength, the way she didn't need permission to exist fully, and you smile, not in triumph. In gratitude, you speak aloud, not to anyone, not really, just into the space between breath and night. Thank you, you say, and the wind carries it gently away. You stand again, leaving the bench and the journal behind, tucked safely where only the curious will find it. And even then, it will read like poetry more than confession. You walk east, toward the faint silhouette of mountains in the far distance, where the air grows sharper and the paths more narrow. The journey isn't over, but it has changed. Now, it belongs to you. You reach a narrow bridge over a slow-moving stream, its surface catching moonlight like glass. You pause at the center, resting your hands on the weathered wood. The water below is shallow but clear, and you see your reflection not quite the same as before. Softer, maybe. Sadder, but in a beautiful way. Like someone who has loved deeply and lived to tell no one. You toss a pebble into the stream. Just one. No wish attached. Just a marker. A moment. A heartbeat acknowledged. And then, from the far side of the bridge, you hear music. Soft and distant. Not regal. Not orchestral. Just a single flute, playing what sounds like a lullaby. The kind of tune you don't remember learning, but somehow know all the same. You follow it. Not because you're drawn by curiosity, but because something in you recognizes the melody as a kind of home. It leads you to a small encampment nestled beneath the trees. A fire burns low, and around it sit three travelers, one with the flute, one with a long braid and a tired smile, and one who nods at you like they've been expecting you. They don't ask questions. They make space. You sit. The fire warms your hands, and the flute keeps playing. No words are exchanged for a long time, and you realize this is what it means to carry something well. Not to speak of it endlessly, not to parade it like a medal, but to sit beside others and let the warmth of what you've known radiate without needing permission. The one with the braid offers you a piece of bread. You take it. You eat slowly, and it tastes like something you once had as a child but can't quite name. When the flute finally stops, the player nods at you, eyes kind and deep. You nod back. A quiet thank you, shared between strangers who aren't really strangers anymore. You sleep beneath the stars that night, the fire low but steady, the journal far behind, and her memory not a shadow, but a light. You don't dream of the palace, or the bath, or the letters. You dream of hands, of warmth, of belonging. When morning comes, you rise early. The others still sleep, and you leave without a sound, stepping gently onto the path beyond the trees. You don't look back, because everything that mattered has already been carried forward. And now, you walk not to reach something, but because this is who you are now. A keeper of quiet truths. A witness to what history tried to forget. Someone who was loved. Someone who remembered. You walk into morning like someone who no longer fears the end of a story. The road feels different beneath your feet now. Not easier, Just honest. And that makes all the difference. The sun rises slow, no urgency in its glow, casting a pale warmth across the fields and fences and forgotten chapels that dot the edge of the countryside. You pause to feel it on your skin, not because it's bright, but because it reminds you you're still here, still becoming. Behind you, there are no footprints, not because you were never there, but because not every journey leaves a mark where others can see. Some stories, the best stories, live in the quiet space between memory and meaning. And they don't need proof. They just need breath. A small cart passes you on the road. An older man driving it. A boy sitting beside him with a handful of apples and eyes full of morning light. They don't stop. But the boy lifts one apple and offers it through the air like a gift. You nod once, take it gently, and hold it in your hand as they vanish down the path. You bite into it. It's sweet, crisp, real, and it reminds you of her. Not because she ever gave you fruit, but because she gave you moments that tasted like truth. You reach a village by midday. It's quiet, not sleepy alive in a soft way. The kind of place where laundry dances on lines and shutters creak not from neglect, but from years of use. A dog watches you pass. It doesn't bark, just stares with the kind of eyes that understand more than most people do. You offer a soft smile and keep walking. At the edge of the village is an inn, modest, but kind. You step inside and are greeted by the scent of thyme and baking bread. A woman behind the counter looks up and nods as if she's already placed you, not by name, but by rhythm. You are not the first to walk in carrying the weight of a story too large to tell. You won't be the last. She hands you a key without asking your business. Room upstairs. Second on the right. You take it. You climb the stairs. The room is simple. A bed. A chair. A window that opens onto nothing in particular. And that's exactly what you need. You sit in the chair and take off your coat. You remove your boots. You breathe, and then you sleep. Not out of exhaustion, but out of peace. When you wake, the sky is soft again. That in-between color that can't decide whether it's dusk or dawn. You don't rush. You wash your face in a basin. You comb your hair with your fingers. And then you open your journal not to write, but to reread. You read what she wrote. Not her exact words, not anymore. But what they meant, and that's more than enough. You hear a knock at the door, a gentle one. You open it and find the innkeeper holding a bowl of stew and a small loaf of bread. She doesn't ask why your eyes are red. She doesn't need to. She just places the tray on the table and leaves. You eat slowly, each bite anchoring you further into the now. The world doesn't feel sharp anymore. It feels worn in, like a coat that finally fits. That night, you sit by the window and watch the stars come out, one by one. No urgency, just presence. You speak aloud, again, not to anyone in particular. She was never the scandal, you say. She was the secret they were afraid to tell. You sleep without dreams. The next day, you walk again. Not far, just enough to see what the world looks like with eyes softened by closure. You find a bookstore tucked between a tailor and a candle maker. Inside, the shelves breathe with stories. You find a volume on the great women of history. You flip through it until you find her name. Catherine. The page is neat, clean, measured. You close the book. You walk to the back of the shop and find a blank notebook. Leather bound, hand-stitched. You purchase it and begin a new chapter. This one doesn't begin with a crown. It begins with a touch, a laugh, a question asked without judgment. It begins with you, and you write. You write what they didn't. You write how she hummed under her breath while brushing her hair. How she tilted her head when she was pretending not to be amused. How her hands moved when she was thinking, and how they stilled when she was scared. You write about how her strength wasn't in ruling, but in revealing, and how that made her dangerous in the best way. You stay in the village for 3 days. No one questions you. A few nod in greeting. One child offers you a flower. You press it into the new journal without a word. You walk paths with no destination. You listen to church bells and distant songs. You let the air wash through you like memory. On the 4th day, you leave. Not because you must, but because the road is calling again. Not for escape, but for continuation. You reach the hilltop just as the sun begins to set, and you look back once. The village is a smudge now, soft and far away, and you whisper, "Thank you." Again, ahead, the horizon stretches like an invitation. You step into it, not alone, never alone. She walks with you now, not as a ghost, not as a dream, but as a truth, quiet, deep, certain. And in the end, that is what this was always about. Not royalty, not power, not scandal, but understanding. Understanding that the most remarkable thing a person can be is known. And you knew her, fully, quietly, completely, in the night between the chapters.